Great. Well, Senator Welch, thanks for joining us. I'm Matt Denhart, president of the Coolidge Foundation. We're delighted to have you with us to address and open our conference, America in Debt, on the history of public debt, an issue, of course, important to President Coolidge, important to our states, and thanks for bringing your leadership and your wisdom and guidance. Just thought we'd ask you a few questions.
Sure.
and get some of your perspective and guidance for us. So first, I was, in your remarks, you talked about the importance of norms, and we've been talking about the Hamiltonian norm, and I thought that was so key. So might you kind of recap the importance of the norm, and what was the Hamiltonian norm?
Well, Alexander Hamilton was, of course, our first Secretary of Treasury. And at the inception of our country, we were broke. We had borrowed money from European creditors.
That's right.
And it was essential for us to borrow that money and spend that money in our revolution. But when our country began, the question was, we were broke and do we pay it back? And there was enormous political pressure on the government, on Hamilton in particular, to stiff our creditors. Yep. And we didn't have the money, and what were we going to do? And you're bankrupt. Hamilton said, no, we don't do that. We pay our bills. And he established that principle that no matter what, one way or the other, we're going to pay our bills. And that was a norm. It wasn't a law.
That's right.
Okay? That was just a conviction. It was a way of being in the world where you accepted your responsibilities and didn't use the circumstances to take a quick end run. That norm is under attack now. Yeah. When Americans are watching Congress debate about whether we're going to default on our debt, can you imagine what Hamilton would say to that, or what Calvin Coolidge would say to that? We have the highest debt we've ever had, like $34 trillion. And that obviously is not sustainable. And we're having arguments about whether it's because we had tax cuts that weren't paid for, or we are spending money that we are not raising to finding a way to pay for. And there's some truth on both sides. Right. I mean, the fact is, if you're going to get to a balanced budget, you have to have a combination of revenues and sustainable spending. But what's been injected into our debate now that is so troublesome is that the norm that we actually do have to pay our bills, that's under assault. Yeah. And you see that in two ways. One, where we actually have these debates about whether when the debt has to be, the debt limit has to be increased, which is not about spending new money. It's really about meeting obligations that Congress has already agreed to. It's an unfathomable debate to me, and it would be, I think, to Hamilton and to Coolidge, that we have an option. It's on Congress to figure it out. Do we have to raise revenues? Do we have to cut spending? Do we have to do some of both? Yes, is the answer to that. Right. But is it an option that will just stiff our creditors? No, has to be the answer to that. And it's not a law. It's a norm.
It's a way of being.
It's a way of being.
That's right.
And it helps us come together because, I tend to be more on the liberal side. I think government should have an active role, helping out with health care, helping out with child care. And others disagree. They want it to be smaller, like Coolidge did.
It's the nature of a big, diverse country.
No, it's right. Yeah. But whether it's Coolidge or it's me,
yep.
Do we have to pay our bills? The answer from my perspective is yes. And it's not a law. It's just an obligation. I mean, could you imagine if you've got a mortgage and you just get sick of paying it, that doesn't end well.
I think Vermont families know they have to.
They know that.
They have to pay. Yeah.
So that's an issue. And the second thing that's happening that's a real concern to me is that we're using government shutdown as a tactic to try to get your way. Right. Again, that's irresponsible. When you have the authority in Congress, and actually the responsibility, with 435 members, 100, of course, in the Senate, we don't have the option to say, we'll just shut the place down because we can't agree. We have the obligation to come up with a plan.
That's right.
And when you're negotiating with somebody, if they're saying, unless I get my way, I'm going to shut the government down. Unless I get my way, I'm going to stiff our creditors and not pay our bills. You're not going to then have a negotiation because there's been a breakdown of that norm that whether you're liberal or you're conservative, you have to, I think, embrace for the benefit of the country. And that is, hey, we pay our bills. And if we're getting our debt and it's too high, we've got to figure out a way to bring that down. So that norm concept, I think that we're so indebted to Hamilton for embracing, and presidents down through Coolidge and since then from embracing is really important. component of us getting to fiscal balance.
Remembering our history, which of course is what
Right.
the Coolidge Foundation strives to do, is remind Americans of our own past. And we've faced, as you said in your remarks, we've faced challenges,
Right.
and we've overcome them. And by working together, and Coolidge certainly a prime example of finding compromise and finding a way to get the job done rather than skirting responsibility. You also mentioned in your remarks, Vermont is somewhat unique, or maybe very unique, in not having a balanced budget amendment. But again, it always does balance its budget. We'll hear from Governor Jim Douglas later as well on that very issue. Might you talk about, I know you served in state government as preparation for your role here in Washington. Might you talk about, on the state level, how is it different than here in Washington?
It's very interesting. Vermont does not have a balanced budget provision in its constitution, but we always balance our budget, whether it's a Republican or Democratic governor. Governor Douglas, I served with him. I was the Senate president. And we had budget battle fights.
Sure.
We had a health care bill the Democrats were pushing. We wanted to increase access to health care. Governor Douglas was concerned about how to pay for it. We passed a bill. He vetoed it. Governor Douglas and I sat down, and we realized we're both right. We were concerned about access. He was concerned about cost. And we understood you can't have sustainable access unless you have sustainable cost.
Sure.
So we rewrote the bill, and we passed it. And in hindsight, people acknowledge that as one of the best healthcare access bills and cost containment bills we've had.
Yep.
So we in Vermont have had that norm through Democratic and Republican governors. You've got to pay your bills. It would be unthinkable to talk about stiffing creditors. It would be unthinkable to talk about shutting government down. But we need more of that Vermont spirit.
Yeah.
And you know, Governor Douglas, of course, a member of your board, and we're so proud of the Coolidge Foundation there in Plymouth, Vermont, and it's right in Windsor County.
That's
where
right.
I'm from.
Where you're from.
And it's really, folks at the Coolidge Foundation have been doing a great job.
Thank
and
you.
I think that some of the norms that Calvin Coolidge embraced, we need more of.
We need a revival. Yeah, that's what we're trying to do. And with the students, you were so kind as well last summer to join us for the centennial celebration and speak to so many of our students, which was really kind of you. So thank you for that. Thank you for joining us today. Is there any other points that you might like to make that you didn't have time to during the
Well,
panel?
I'm going back to the norms, because that's what I'm seeing under assault here. Truth matters, integrity matters, paying your bills matter. I mean, these are the basic things, and it's kind of odd for me to be sitting here as U.S. Senator from Vermont talking about these things because I grew up where you just could expect that.
The norm was the norm.
The norm was the norm. There wasn't a debate about it. That was what you did.
Yeah.
And I think the work that the Coolidge Foundation does in memory of his leadership, it reminds us that it's actually pretty simple in some ways. You've got to figure out how to do the job and not debate about whether you have to do the job at all. You've got to do the work.
That's right. Coolidge liked to say, he talked often about the importance of the obvious. And as you said, the solutions sometimes are obvious, but getting to them can be a challenge. And we think his other values, civility and openness to lots of ideas and debate, but collegial debate and productive are just so important. So that's what we are trying to foster in the young people in our programs. And just so delighted to have you with us to help share that message with the younger generations.
Thank you.
Remind us of what's important here in our country.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator.
Yep, thanks.
Okay.